Noel is a disgraceful ugly who, despite being the grandson of the strongest seeker in history, has the weakest job class. Yet his ability to manipulate others and smooth talk out of every situation helps him create the strongest party to achieve his dream of becoming the strongest seeker. Noel lives in a world where a dimensional portal called Abyss forms when the concentration of magic power in the atmosphere reaches critical mass, linking the human and demon worlds to a void. When these connections are deep enough, the Abyss manifests powerful monsters that devour human flesh. And 2 years ago, one of these portals with a depth level of 12 was formed in Noel's hometown. That night, the sky turned red with fire and blood, as the demons ravaged every human they could find. And amongst their ranks was a monster called Lord, which is only summoned when an abyss has a depth level of 12. Still, Noel and the villagers hoped to survive since his grandfather, Brandon Stolen, was the strongest seeker to ever live throughout history. He once defeated a monster with an abyssal depth of 13 known as Cocytus the Silverfish, earning him the nickname Overdeath. Nevertheless, he leads the surviving townsmen to the shelter and wields his sword to fight the monsters by himself. Yet, Noel, being a logical analyst, knows that age has caught up to his grandfather. But Brandon reminds him of his nickname, the Overdeath, and claims that he will protect them with his life. Ultimately, he steps on the battlefield. However, his main goal in fighting for his townsmen is to show Noel that men can't let anyone look down on them, even if they are stronger than him. With these thoughts in mind, he slices through all the low-level monsters and challenges Lord to a deal, while Noel can only hide in his crouch, hearing their swords clash violently. As these sounds disappear, the crickets start to chirp, prompting Noel to leave the shelter, only to find his grandfather wounded on the ground, which riles up his emotions. While Brandon can't believe that age is the reason for his death, such is the fate of all seekers fighting against the abyss. Being in this life of constant combat means that the god of death will be watching over them. Still, Noel selfishly promises to become the strongest seeker just like him, just to make his grandfather die happy. Although Noel takes this promise very seriously, he is still stuck at the lowest possible class type called the Talker, whose job is to craft lofty plans of attack against the abyss. 2 years have passed since the dreadful night, but its memories still burn hot inside his heart, giving him the power to fight the abyss. During one of his missions, Noel leads his teammates, Lloyd and Walter, to attack the front lines, while Tanya supports them with light magic from the rear end. While this is happening, Noel explains that lesser vampires are monsters that can't use magic or skills, but their main body, the queen, can lay multiple eggs in short intervals, making it a feared opponent nonetheless. Upon hearing this, Walter, being a simpleton, suggests they should just attack the queen and be done with the mission. However, Noel claims that missions is difficult for the likes of C-rankers, and fighting the main body after defeating the Spalls would increase their chances of victory significantly. Tanya and Lloyd agree to understand where he's coming from, but Walter condescendingly reminds everyone how their weak party was assigned this mission thanks to Noel's talker buff skills. Aside from that, the only thing good about a talker is their ability to give orders and buff his teammates' abilities by 25%. Although Walter intended to cheer him up, Noel feels sickened after being reminded of his job. Nevertheless, when push comes to shove, Noel forgets about his troubled past, ordering everyone to duck and avoid the monster's attack. Unfortunately, the queen unleashes a poisonous gas, which separates everyone from Noel. At that moment, the main body attacks Walter and the others, knowing they can't fight back without their talker's buff magic. Once the situation turns dire, Walter yells at Noel, reminding him that his job is to give them orders, all while Noel is stuck in the past. But as soon as he senses that Walter is looking down upon him for being a talker, a nerve inside snaps, which forces him to draw his weapon and fight. With this newfound determination, Noel vows to show them how a talker fights. Firstly, he buffs his team with Tactician, a spell that can increase their spatial awareness by 25%. This skill allows them to follow Noel's orders to the pen. His second spell is Battle Voice, which increases the recovery speed of stamina and magic power, in turn allowing Walter and Lloyd to fight openly. During this, Tanya informs Noel about the spawns hiding on top of the abyss, and if more lesser vampires join the battle, then they will surely lose. However, Noel casts peer support to increase morale and stabilize her temperament. Still, it doesn't stop the lesser vampires from joining the fight, but at this point, Noel is forced to hold them back, while instructing the others on their methods. Tanya keeps up the barrier, and the two attackers unleash their most powerful strike on the Queen. In the meantime, Noel casts Stun Howl to temporarily restrict the monsters from moving. This makes them an easy target for his magic gun's ice bullet. However, one of the lesser vampires escapes from his sight, but his calculations are so precise that he can predict when the monster will reach him. With 23 seconds remaining on the clock, Noel initiates the assault command, which is just another way of saying, fudge the Queen with your ultimate skills. As expected, their attacks work like a charm, but when Tanya and the others turn around, they see a lesser vampire about to kill Noel. However, he had calculated that Walter and Lloyd would defeat the Queen in 23 seconds, exactly 2 seconds, which immobilizes the lesser vampire before it can kill him. Despite his precise calculations and exceptional leadership, the team thinks his methods are too reckless, especially since Noel didn't know whether the lesser vampires would stop or not after the Queen's death. Their words remind him of when he was chosen to be a talker, instead of a warrior like Brandon. Still, his grandfather always told him that he would become the strongest seeker alive, even with his job class. Even so, he couldn't let anyone look down upon him. Brandon's words and Noel's promise to him are embedded deep within his soul, urging him to become the most powerful hunter alive, even with his job. While on their way to Atrai, the capital city of Venant Empire, Noel reveals this country is prosperous because people can use magic, though this also means that abysses are frequently formed due to high concentrations of magic power. But to face this threat, the country developed its economy by building magical tools with all the materials gathered from monsters from the abyss. This technology became the pillar or backbone of their country's economy. Therefore, seekers and hunters who collect such rare items are admired by people. But since their party is relatively unknown, most of the locals don't know their names. However, these things don't stop Walter from drinking heavily to celebrate their first 5 million fill mission, but notices that Noel is as quiet as ever. He thinks that Noel is still mad about them not haggling for an extra 500,000, and so Walter tries to prove that haggling for more money might ruin their reputation. Moreover, he thinks that his grandfather would share the same sentiment. Yet, unbeknownst to him, Brandon was the complete opposite. He thought Noel that haggling over money is an important part of a seeker's life, as more money never hurts. Not only that, his grandfather told him to disregard what people say about him, and only focus on yourself since they can't get to higher positions without money. According to him, a seeker being labeled evil is the best thing that could ever happen to them, as the world knew him as Overdeath, the undying demon. Yet, Noel doesn't share his grandfather's wisdom with Walter or anyone else because they would think badly of him. Instead, he sarcastically admits that everything from Walter being born in this world to this point was his fault. After a few more drinks, the great douchebag Walter loses all common sense, and claims that Neil should agree with him since he's 2 years older. However, Noel believes that it is pretty lame of him to hide behind his age like a middle-aged woman who just got work done. But overall, he's only worried that Noel's stingy attitude would ruin their party's reputation in the long run. Under these circumstances, both Walter and Noel lose their cool temporarily, but before things can escalate, Lloyd, their party leader, breaks the fight. After enjoying their dinner, he splits the reward money, which turns out to be 250,000 fil each. However, Tanya doesn't understand the maths behind this since their reward was 5 million. Unexpectedly, Lloyd reveals that some of the money was spent on party management such as buying food and items, while the rest of the money was spent on taxes and fees, as they are not a clan. At that moment, Noel steps in, suggesting they should establish their own clan, instead of paying affiliation fees to others. Despite his plan, Lloyd states they have only managed to save 12 million Phil, while establishing a clan would require 20 million. Unexpectedly, Noel claims that he will be chipping in with 7 million of his savings. Yet, Lloyd still thinks it'll be impossible to establish a clan, as they need to build a base in the capital, but rents there are off the charts. However, Noel counters his weak argument, claiming he has already found cheap places to rent. Still, Tanya thinks establishing a clan would be a waste of money since they are only C-rank newbies and have zero experience. Surprisingly enough, Noel shares the same sentiment as her, but he looks at things from a different perspective. Simply put, he has been gathering knowledge about clans since their party was formed, and now the only thing they lack is real-time experience in operating a clan. However, they can't acquire that experience by sitting around or doing second-hand jobs that pay nothing. Despite his clear explanation, Lloyd is still skeptical that they will lose all of their savings since winning the country's trust and securing high-paying jobs will take time. But Noel thinks otherwise. He reveals their country wants more people to become seekers. Thus, they hire good-looking men from various clans for high-paying jobs. Eventually, those handsome men become famous with the ladies and are drowned in cash, which in turn attracts more people towards hunting. Yet, for some reason, Tanya and Lloyd still try to argue that establishing a clan is the worst idea, even though it is a step they will need to take sooner or later. Just then, Walter surprises everyone by agreeing with Noel, which evens the odds of voting. As their leader, Noel urges him to share his thoughts on the matter. But before doing so, Lloyd asks if he's really committed to establishing a clan. Without any hesitation, Noel reminds him that his dream was always to become the strongest seeker in the world and surpass death. To obtain his dream, he will go to any extent, which is exactly the resolve needed to persuade Lloyd into this. However, things don't turn out as planned. When Walter barges in his room one day later, revealing that both Lloyd and Tanya have betrayed them, our protagonist quickly confirmed that the note had Lloyd's handwriting. The short message explained that he had made a failed investment and was in deep debt, so he had embezzled 12,800,000 Phil of their party's funds and had fled the capital before it came to light. However, Noel's reaction after reading the note surprised Walter, because instead of being upset, our protagonist began to laugh out loud. Walter even scolded him, but the other replied that seeing how the ever-chivalrous Lloyd was doing that was hilarious. Eventually, Noel began to get serious and asked Walter when and where he had gotten that note, to which the other replied that he had found it in Lloyd's room. Right after, our protagonist recalled that they weren't supposed to meet until that afternoon, but Walter said he had heard about a good job in the tavern the night before. Walter wanted to tell Lloyd before it got snatched up. That was why he had gone early, but the other had cleaned out his room when Walter got there, and the innkeeper had given him that note from the other. Noel then asked if the innkeeper had mentioned when Lloyd had left, and the other replied that they had left the night before about 8 p.m. After hearing that, Noel deduced that they had slipped away in the night just before the city gates closed, and since the current time was 9:30 am, over half a day had passed since then. Nevertheless, our protagonist also knew they would normally have found out about the treason until that afternoon or later, making him think that Lloyd had found a good way to buy time. Afterward, Walter asked Noel what they were going to do, to which the other replied that there should be a record of them passing. So if they asked around and found out which gate they had gone through, they would know where they had gone. Walter wasn't sure if they would be able to catch up, but our protagonist told him that they would do it on a horse, and since Lloyd and Tanya should have gone on foot, they would be at a disadvantage. After hearing that, Walter got ready to go, but Noel asked him what they would do when they caught up with them. The other then replied that he was going to beat the crap out of Lloyd, and our protagonist then said that beating him before making up was a plan a muscle-bound, air-headed fairy would think up. Immediately thereafter, Noel got very serious and added that Lloyd and Tanya had chosen to run away, which was a definite betrayal. So catching them wasn't going to resolve that. In fact, at worst, that could lead to a fight to the death. Our protagonist then asked Walter if he was sure he could defeat Lloyd, to which the other replied that he could if Noel supported him. Our protagonist then added that he believed Walter thought he could fight Tanya too, but even if he beat them, they wouldn't get their money back, so doing that would be a waste of time. Noel knew that Lloyd and Tanya also knew that, which was why they had thought they could get away if they made it look like they had eloped together. Those words pissed Walter off a lot, and after cursing, he asked our protagonist if they were supposed to just cry themselves to sleep, to which the other replied that his motto was to make them pay 1,000 times over. Some time later, they both arrived at the tavern and Walter said that when our protagonist had told him to get ready, he had thought the other was going to take him somewhere. Right after, Noel replied that although the other might be dumb, he was not incompetent. Walter was a gifted warrior, but in the same way Walter had a role, our protagonist had his. In short, Noel was the one in charge of the thinking. Once inside, Noel told all the seekers in there that he had a job for them. 2 members of their party Blue Beyond, Lloyd and Tanya, had escaped with embezzled funds, so he wanted the seekers to bring them to him alive. Our protagonist even added that whoever succeeded would receive 2 million fil. Walter was in shock after hearing the announcement, but Noel explained that they couldn't do anything even if they managed to find them. Plus, our protagonist had to cast a wide net, or he wouldn't know who he was looking for. Walter didn't understand the logic behind that, but Noel said he would explain everything later. Right after, Wolf, from the party Lightning Bite, took the job. Afterward, other parties accepted the job too, and the hunt began. However, once the seekers left, an old man took Noel and Walter outside and told them that he knew where Lloyd and Tanya were. After a tough negotiation for the old seeker, he revealed that he had seen Lloyd and Tanya on Barley Road outside the South Gate, so he believed that they were on their way to Carnot Village. Noel then told the old man to get his party together and wait for them at the South Gate. He also told Walter to go with them since our protagonist had some unfinished business to attend to. Sometime later, they all met at the South Gate, and before they began the journey, Noel told Walter that he would show no mercy to Lloyd and Tanya. He had been thinking about what to do if and when they betrayed them the whole time. After all, people strayed from the path easily. In fact, by seeing Walter's attitude, our protagonist concluded that being half-hearted like the warrior would only make dealing with their partners harder. A while later, Noel, Walter, and the old man's party ambushed Lloyd and Tanya and captured them without giving them a chance to retaliate. Afterward, Walter began to yell at Lloyd, but Noel stopped him. Our protagonist then asked Lloyd about the payment for the lesser vampires, to which the red-haired man replied that he had used those funds to repay his debt. However, Noel said that Lloyd didn't really have a failed investment, but he was a gambler instead, which astonished the other. The red-haired guy had lost too much and had gone to a loan shark. Then he had used the party's capital to repay his debt. Of course, after hearing that, Walter was even more pissed than before and resumed his yelling at Lloyd. After all, they had put in blood, sweat, and tears for that money. It was then when the red-haired finally had enough and yelled back at Walter that they didn't understand the pressure that was on him as the leader. He also added that he didn't want to touch the party's money either. The thing was that the alarms kept racking up, and there was nothing else he could do. In fact, he even questioned Noel and Walter's right to blame him. After all, they had been the ones who had foisted the responsibility of leading to him. But then they pretended to assert their own rights when it suited them. Those words triggered something in Noel because it was him and not Walter the first one to hate Lloyd. In fact, our protagonist kept hitting the other while saying that they indeed had that right because the other had said he wanted to be the leader. Noel also didn't buy the pressure thing and simply said that the only reason Lloyd had gambled away their money had been because he was an asshole. Lloyd then finally asked for mercy because Walter didn't stop kicking him, but our protagonist didn't feel up to it. That attitude astonished not only the old man and his party, even Walter was shocked by seeing that. Right after, Tanya finally opened her mouth and asked Noel to let Lloyd go, to which the other replied by asking her if she was offering to take the beating in his place. After all, he supported the equality of the sexes. Before she could explain herself, our protagonist cast a spell on her, forcing her to tell the truth. She then admitted that she had gambled with Lloyd and had used the party's money with him. She even complained, saying that she could have won if the stupid Lloyd had let her play more. Once she got free from the spell, she complained to him, saying that using mind control for personal benefit was punished with prison. To which the other replied that Lloyd and her were criminals who had embezzled our protagonist's party's money, so the use of that skill was permitted by law if it was to elicit a criminal confession. While saying that, Noel turned into a red snake, or at least that was how she saw him. The next moment, he added that they would get 10 years of hard labor for embezzlement. At that moment, the old man asked for his payment, to which our protagonist replied that he had to wait a little longer. The old man didn't like that, and Noel then turned hostile to him, hitting him hard in the chest, which took Walter by surprise. Right after, Noel recalled the moment his grandfather had taught that technique to him, a technique that could knock out a person with just one hit. Shortly after, the old man's party members carried him apart, and immediately thereafter a slave trader called Finocchio Barzini arrived at the scene, astonishing all the people present, while the newcomer, who had arrived with 2 strong bodyguards, greeted Noel. Our protagonist recalled that the biggest mob family in the capital was the Lucianos, and Finocchio was one of their young leaders. He was the boss of the Barzini family, a classy yet perverse man. He was affable yet vicious, and due to the polar opposites he embodied, people called him the Mad Clown. It was then that Noel, who obviously knew the newcomer, explained to Walter that contacting Finocchio was the unfished business he had back then. In short, since Noel knew Lloyd and Tanya didn't have the money, he had reached out to Finocchio to make back what he had lost by selling them to him as slaves. Obviously, Lloyd and Tanya didn't agree with that, but our protagonist replied that his only other choice was to hand them over to the police. He then asked them if they knew the survival rate for prisoners sentenced to hard labor in the mines, which was only 2%. So, in the end, it was a far better option to take the chance that a kind master bought them as slaves. He even asked Finocchio to find good masters for them. Sadly, Finocchio could only offer 6 million fil, which shocked Noel. The slave trader then explained that the Holy Cross Church was about to decree they took vows of poverty, which meant no luxuries. So, buying a high-priced slave would draw the church's attention. However, our protagonist raised the price to 15 million and showed Finocchio a way to make a huge profit out of those slaves, which tempted the other to the point of the slave trader asking Noel to join his family, which our protagonist rejected. In the end, they made a deal, and Finocchio gave Noel the down payment before threatening the old man against revealing what he had heard about the deal. Afterward, he took Lloyd and Tanya away, while the young woman cursed and insulted Walter and Noel. Right after, our protagonist paid the old man and left, while hearing how the old man called him a demon. Noel then decided that he would build off of that bad name and become the strongest in the world. The next day, Walter was about to leave the city when Noel arrived to see him off. Walter had decided to quit being a seeker after all that had happened, despite our protagonist trying to convince him otherwise. Once Noel left, Walter said that he couldn't tell if our protagonist had a heart or not. He even revealed that Tanya had a crush on him, but she wasn't what Noel was looking for, because rather than love or comfort, our protagonist was only looking to get stronger. As for Noel, he recalled that snakes discarded their old scales to regrow tougher ones and decided that he needed to shed his skin. He would restart Blue Beyond, starting that day. The following day, somewhere in the capital, a girl finally tracks down Noel. Meanwhile, Noel is busy interviewing potential new members for his clan, though Wolf keeps pestering him, insisting that any competent seeker would already be part of a clan. Noel, clearly annoyed, tells him to stop being a nuisance, but Wolf remains convinced he knows what's best for the eloquent one. He then invites Noel to join his group, the Lightning Bite. Noel reflects that, aside from Wolf, the group's leader and swordsman, they also have Lisha, an elf archer, along with other highly skilled members. Even among rank C groups, they're one of the most promising newcomers. Wolf adds that Noel would earn more by joining them than by trying to recruit others. Speaking of which, Lisha teases her boss, saying his persistence is probably why the florist turned him down earlier. Wolf, annoyed, grumbles that she's oversharing personal details, but in in the end, Noel agrees to join on one condition. He must be made the leader of Lightning Bite. The group, without hesitation, shows their support for this idea, though the current leader, Wolf, is completely opposed, as he was the one who founded the clan. Suddenly, a female figure approaches Noel in the tavern, and he is impressed by how she managed to get so close without being noticed, especially with Lycia, a specialist in observation, present. The girl's name is Alma, and she found Noel after seeing his announcement posted on a wall. Noel, curious about her age since minors aren't allowed to be seekers, asks how old she is, and she claims to be 21. Soon, the whole Lightning Bite group surrounds Alma, bombarding her with personal questions, from her hobbies to her favorite book. Unfazed, Alma answers every question without missing a beat. When Noel asks her class and rank, she reveals she's a scout class, rank C. Noel, intrigued, knows that having a skilled scout paired with an archer like Lycia is a significant advantage in an abyss. Intrigued, he asks why Alma wants to become a seeker, but she surprises him by saying she doesn't. She's only interested in Noel because he's the grandson of Overdeath, the man her grandfather fought against in the past, a battle where her relative lost his arm. Concerned, Noel wonders if she's seeking revenge, but Alma reassures him that she has no interest in something so pointless. She only wanted to meet the grandson of such a legendary figure to see what kind of seeker he had become. Despite that, Noel apologizes for any harm his grandfather may have caused, but Alma brushes it off, explaining her grandfather passed away last month. Noel then asks for her grandfather's name, and when she reveals it to be Alker Judicali, everyone around is shocked. Noel recalls that Alker was part of the Assassin Society, a group that would kill anyone for the right price. Alker was not just a member, but the founder and first leader, a legendary assassin. Just then, a man named Logan approaches, overhearing their conversation and sarcastically remarking that if Alma's claim to be Alker's granddaughter is a joke, it's not a very good one. Wolf tells Logan it's none of his business, but Logan persists. He adds that secret taverns have unwritten rules about who is allowed inside, implying Alma doesn't belong there. Alma admits she wasn't aware of these rules, and Logan warns that regulars usually don't take kindly to anyone breaking them. Unfazed by his threat, Alma interrupts Logan's speech to ask Noel what defines a seeker's prestige. Noel responds that it starts with class and rank, followed by strength that others can recognize. Alma, unfazed, decides that all she needs to do is beat Logan to earn some recognition. Furious, Logan tries to punch her, but Alma dodges with incredible speed, lands a strike to his face, and finishes with a downward kick to his head. Impressed, Noel wastes no time in hiring her on the spot without directly responding to the offer. Alma's stomach growls, and she admits she's suddenly very hungry. Later, while eating a fried pastry that Noel gave her, Alma remarks that she's never tasted anything so delicious in the mountains. Noel, still skeptical, admits he didn't fully believe her story about being Alka's granddaughter. Alma responds by saying that the moment she saw Noel, she immediately believed he was Overdeath's grandson because of the determination in his eyes, the same kind that drives someone to do whatever it takes to reach the top. Reflecting on that, Alma mentions her grandfather once advised her never to challenge Overdeath, calling him unpredictable and incomprehensible, someone no one stood a chance against. For some reason, Noel's eyes reminded her of that advice. Curious, Noel asks if Alma has been training to become an assassin in the mountains, and she confirms that she's been trying to advance from scout to assassin and beyond, though she hasn't officially reached rank B yet. Still, she meets all the requirements. Puzzled, Noel asks why she hasn't joined the Assassin Society, as it seems like it would be easy given her abilities. Alma admits that was indeed the plan until the day she was matched against another assassin during training. In this simulated duel, her opponent showed some potential, but Alma found it easy to dodge every attack and counter effectively, eventually subduing him and placing a dagger at his chest. Desperate, the man reminded her that it was just a test. Alma then recalled a lesson from her grandfather: the strongest survive, and the weak offer their lives to the god of hell. The man argued that those were old beliefs, outdated since the new leader took over the organization, and those sinister traditions no longer existed. Still, none of that mattered to Alma, as she had been taught otherwise. Just as she was about to finish him off, she was stopped by Simon Gregory, the current leader of the organization. Because of this incident, Alma was expelled and permanently banned from rejoining, as she represented a behavior the society no longer desired. The organization had changed drastically, almost becoming a state institution, shifting its focus from executions to espionage, as the new leader believed that would secure the society's future. Hearing this, Noel feels uneasy about being targeted for knowing such a story, but Alma reassures him, claiming she'll protect him, calling herself his older sister. Later, as they walk through the forest, Noel asks what Alma knows about support classes and their enhancements. She explains that on their own, they're weak, but their support can turn the tide of battle. Noel adds that buffs have a wide range of effects. For instance, the Talker's Assault Command ability can end a fight in a blink, but if used incorrectly, it could lead the group to their death. That's why the one providing the buff must analyze the entire battle before acting, ensuring that each command maximizes the potential of every companion on the field. Another critical point is that Talkers can't enhance themselves, which is why they can't operate alone. Alma remarks that Noel has the ability to do this, and he replies that if he didn't, he would have been dead long ago. Upon reaching their destination, Noel asks Alma to catch a monster for him, explaining that due to the abyss, the flora and fauna have mutated. While not as dangerous as wild beasts, they shouldn't be underestimated. Today, Alma's target is a killer rabbit, specifically a horned iron rabbit. After receiving a buff from the Talker, Alma feels confident she doesn't need help. Noel explains that Alma must have the Excel ability, which allows scouts to accumulate speed up to 5 times their normal pace. However, it took her a long time to adjust her body to this ability. Otherwise, she would have broken her bones and muscles from overuse. Noel emphasizes that since the body must adapt to the buffs received, he wants to see how compatible Alma is with his support spells, as the outcome will influence their plans moving forward. Noel then casts Battle Voice and Tactician on her and asks her to push Excel to its limit, increasing her speed from 5 to 6 times. The test will be complete if Alma catches at least one rabbit in under 10 seconds. Without delay, Alma embarks on the mission and captures several rabbits along the way. Impressed by the impact a Talker's support can have, she returns with 13 killer rabbits before the time limit, and Noel counts 8.6 seconds on the clock. He's astonished at how quickly she adapted to the buff on her first attempt. Satisfied, the training is deemed complete, and Noel feels confident in moving forward with their group mission. He then shows Alma a letter from a small town they recently cleared of monsters. According to the letter, a group of thieves has appeared near Mint's village, and this will be the first job for the newly reborn Blue Beyond. Soon after, the team heads to the village in a carriage. Alma is thrilled, as it's her first time riding in one. But Noel quickly dampens her excitement, warning her that it's only fun in the beginning and that the trip to Mintz will be long and tiresome. Since they have time, Noel explains the various tasks seekers handle beyond slaying monsters from the abyss. These include monster hunts, crime hunts where they track and capture criminals, treasure hunts, and mythic hunts that explore unknown territories. He adds that issues with criminals, like the one Blue Beyond is set to deal with, are usually the responsibility of the local lord. However, since lords often act too slowly, villages can be destroyed before help arrives. In such cases, they turn to seekers for assistance. This particular contract comes from a poor farming village, so they likely won't get a reward, but the mission will be a test. Hearing this, Alma gets excited about defeating the bad guys and protecting the villagers. Noel is grateful for her enthusiasm, as it reminds him of a similar time with his former group. At one point during the journey, the group stops in Eudora for the night, and Alma complains about how stiff she feels. They plan to swap carriages in the morning and continue their journey, finding a place to stay. However, proves to be their toughest challenge so far, as every inn is fully booked. After much effort, they finally secure a room. Noel insists that Alma take the bed while he sleeps on the floor. Alma, puzzled, asks why they can't share the bed, a question that flusters Noel, who sticks to his decision. Later, as he steps out of the bath without a shirt, Alma comments on the hard work it must take to achieve a body like his. She adds that no matter how hard Noel works, he'll never compare to frontline fighters. If Noel were a warrior like Oberdeth, he might become the ultimate seeker, but unfortunately, that's not the case. Her words strike a chord with Noel, and he asks her to close her eyes. Without warning, he touches her forehead before lying down to sleep. Reflecting on Alma's words, Noel acknowledges that he knows all too well what she meant. As a child, he ended up with the weakest class and needed his grandfather's training just to become remotely strong. Upon arriving in the village, the chief comes out to welcome the party, but seems a bit surprised to see only 2 members. Noel explains that the rest of the party had to leave for various reasons, conveniently omitting the fact that he had sold them off. The Blue Beyond party now consists only of Noel and Alma, but Noel assures the chief that the 2 of them are fully capable of dealing with the thieves. They sit down in the chief's living room for a meeting, and Noel notices the chief's daughter peeking at him from behind the curtain. He greets her, but she quickly hides. The chief apologizes for his daughter's behavior, explaining that she was excited to meet him, but Noel wants to focus on the mission. According to the letter Noel received, there's a group of about 20 thieves in the area, and they've already attacked a neighboring village, making this village a potential next target. Noel asks if there are any clues to the thieves' location, and the chief reveals that he has scouted it out. The thieves are hiding in a rocky clearing in the eastern part of the forest, and with this information, Noel feels confident he can find them. However, before heading out, Noel wants to discuss payment. The chief's letter mentioned $200,000 upfront and $300,000 upon completion. Before Noel finishes speaking, the chief's wife brings out the upfront payment of $200,000, and the chief reassures him that the rest will be paid when the job is done. Noel is surprised by the lack of bargaining, and from the weight of the bag, it seems the chief barely scraped together the money, showing his desperation. With the upfront payment secured, Noel and Alma head out to complete the mission. As they walk, Alma mentions that the chief was staring at her chest the entire time, even in front of his wife and daughter, which makes her think very little of him. Suddenly, the chief's daughter runs up behind them, wanting to talk to Noel. She shows him a toy, which Noel recognizes as the one he gave her during his last visit to the village. She's treasured it ever since because she really likes him. After promising to cook something for him when he returns, Noel says he's looking forward to it. Alma finds the interaction amusing, noting Noel's sweet side, though he brushes off her comments. Later that night, they arrive at the thieves' camp, but to Noel's surprise, there are more than 40 thieves, double the expected number. Noel quickly identifies the leader as Gordo the Razor Blade, who has a 2 million Phil bounty on his head. Being ranked as a scout, Noel asks Alma if she's confident she can defeat him. Alma believes she could win in a one-on-one fight, but not if she has to deal with all of Gordo's henchmen simultaneously. Noel expected this and assures her that he has a plan for handling the henchmen. Alma is surprised that Noel plans to fight alongside her, as the bandits might detect him if he gets any closer, though Alma can get closer thanks to her stealth skill. Noel tells her to stop talking and focus on the plan, so she activates her stealth and infiltrates the camp. Thanks to Noel's skill, Link, they can maintain communication through thought. Alma soon reaches Gordo's tent and informs Noel that she's ready. Noel then uses Stun Howl, paralyzing the entire camp. He orders Alma to kill Gordo, and with her quintuple acceleration, she swiftly pierces his heart. With Gordo dead, they now need to deal with the remaining bandits. Noel instructs Alma to keep them occupied while he moves in. As she slaughters the thieves, Noel notices that Alma is enjoying the fight a bit too much, but he pushes that thought aside for now and joins her, using his fire bullet to incinerate the rest of the thieves. Once the mission is complete, they return to the village, where the chief greets them and expresses relief that they are safe. When asked about the thieves, Noel informs him that they've all been dealt with, offering Gordo's head as proof. The chief declines to see it, trusting that the job is done. Noel asks for the rest of his payment, but before paying, the chief invites them to dinner, as his daughter, Chelsea, has been eagerly awaiting it. As they sit down, the chief mentions that Chelsea was recently evaluated as a swordsman, and she asks Noel if he thinks she could become a seeker like him. Noel tells her that anyone can become a seeker, though there's usually a training camp involved. Alternatively, she could work as a supporter for an established seeker to gain experience. As Noel explains this, he notices the chief and his wife exchange a look that suggests they are up to something. A little later, Chelsea asks if Noel would allow her to join his party if she becomes a powerful seeker in the future. Noel replies that if she grows strong and still looks up to him, he would gladly accept her. Chelsea is thrilled to hear this. Just then, the chief and his wife return with a bottle of expensive wine, wanting to celebrate. The chief pours wine for both Noel and Oma, but after examining it, Noel insists that the chief take the first sip, refusing to drink before him. The chief starts to panic and fumbles for an excuse as to why he can't drink the wine. But Noel persists, insisting that the chief take the first sip since he knows the wine is poison. The chief tries to deny it, but Noel lays out his reasoning. First, the chief lied about there being only 20 thieves, likely to reduce the payout, and someone dishonest enough to do that wouldn't open an expensive bottle for guests. Second, the wine isn't expensive at all. Noel can tell by the smell that it's the cheapest kind and has been opened for a long time. Finally, Noel has sensed a distinct bloodlust coming from the chief and his wife ever since they presented the bottle. Alma mocks the chief for thinking they would fall for such an obvious assassination attempt, pointing out that the poison wouldn't have worked on her anyway since she's immune to all poisons. The chief gets angry, accusing them of having no proof, but Noel tells him that if he truly didn't poison the wine, he should have no problem drinking it himself. In response, the chief throws a tantrum, demanding that Noel leave the village immediately. Unfazed, Noel uses his confession skill, forcing the chief to admit that he intended to poison them to avoid paying and steal their money and equipment instead. Chelsea, the chief's daughter, is shocked to hear that her father was trying to kill Noel. But now that Noel has heard the confession, he leaps up and stabs the chief in the eye with his thumb. The chief screams in pain, but Noel isn't done yet. He promises to take out the chief's other eye, then his nose, and finally his tongue. The chief begs for mercy, but Noel has no intention of forgiving someone who tried to kill him. He tells the chief that if he wants to live, he'll have to hand over every penny he has. The chief pleads, explaining that he needs the money to pay off his debts to the Gambino Mafia, and that they'll do terrible things to him if he can't pay. But Noel couldn't care less. Just as he's about to carry out his threat, Chelsea appears with a bag containing all the money they have, around 800,000, and offers it to Noel, pleading for him to spare her father. The chief yells at her, warning that the Gambino family might kill them without that money. But Chelsea points out that if she doesn't give the money to Noel, he will definitely kill the chief right now. Noel accepts the money and, after confirming it's enough, tells Alma it's time to go. As they leave, Chelsea curses Noel and all seekers for what he's done, which stings Noel a bit since she admired him just moments earlier, but it is what it is. As they walk away, Alma asks Noel if he's okay with how things ended. Noel shrugs it off, saying he got his money and the chief was the one in the wrong, so he can live with being hated for his ruthlessness. A little while later, they spot an airship flying overhead, and Noel recognizes the insignia of the Goat clan, a 3-star regalia. Alma thinks it's cool, but she doesn't know what regalia means, so Noel explains that it's a title awarded by the Empire. There are currently 7 regalia stars, though not all are equal, with the last 4 at the bottom, the third and second being relatively equal, and only the strongest clan earning the 1-star regalia. Being recognized as a regalia grants various privileges, including the right to a personal airship. The seekers who earn this title are among the strongest, smartest, wealthiest, and most experienced. Noel has already decided that by this time next year, he will become powerful enough to earn regalia recognition. Seeing the determination in his eyes, Alma recalls the day she was rejected by the Assassin Society. She had asked Simone if her performance was good enough, and while Simone acknowledged her extraordinary combat abilities, he told her that didn't mean she passed. He had a simple question for her. Was she the one who killed Alker, the former leader of the Assassin Association? Alma admitted that she was. Though Alker was considered the god of assassins, he had become a sitting duck in his madness. Alker was a terrifying man, but even he could never defeat Overdeath, and that failure gnawed at his mind until it drove him insane. Alma revealed that she was Alker's daughter, born from one of the many women he kidnapped. Alker had many children, but he wasn't interested in raising them. He only wanted to create an assassin capable of succeeding him. He forced all his children to fight each other to the death, and Alma was the last one standing. Simone understood Alma's tragic background, but told her that she still wasn't a good fit for the Assassin Society. Alma was devastated. unable to believe she had been rejected despite passing the test. Those 21 years of her life felt wasted. Simone told her she was free to live however she wished, but if she wanted a new purpose, he mentioned that the grandson of Oberdeth was now a seeker, and, while more of a talker, was still incredibly strong. Intrigued, Alma headed to the capital to meet him, and now she's glad she did. She's found a new purpose in life and swears to fight by Noel's side forever. Inside a high-security prison, a guard is found unconscious in the bathroom. The assailant then transforms into an identical version of the guard, seamlessly taking his place. He heads to the guard station, where his partner suspects nothing. Playing the part well, the impersonator casually inquires which prisoner they're watching, prompting the partner to start discussing the horrific murders committed by their detainee, the puppeteer. This is exactly who the impersonator has come looking for. Each morning, Noel starts his routine by running 2 laps around the castle walls, carrying a heavy load of rocks on his back. He gives himself a strict 2-hour limit and never skips this regimen. His grandfather ingrained this habit in him ever since Noel decided to pursue becoming a seeker. As a talker, Noel can't magically boost his strength, so his only path to power is through relentless training. After completing his routine, Noel takes a shower, reflecting on what Alma told him recently, that no amount of training can match the strength that comes from natural talent. At that moment, there's a knock on his door, and Alma steps in earlier than expected. She was supposed to arrive in a few hours, so Noel isn't quite prepared. Alma teases him, saying he should be glad she's early, and upon seeing Noel's impressive physique, she tells him she's going to touch him. Without much warning, Alma playfully pushes Noel onto the bed. Even though she views herself as his big sister, it doesn't stop her from attempting a kiss. Noel struggles to fend her off, but with Alma's natural scout strength, he's left with one option: he headbutts her. Afterward, Alma admits she may have gone too far, but still thinks Noel didn't need to headbutt her. Nevertheless, Noel believes his response was perfectly justified given her advance. Alma hasn't given up, though. She seizes his arm and declares that this is now officially a date. Annoyed but playing along, Noel suggests their first stop: the Appraisal Guild. Appraisers are a unique class found among gnomes, dedicated solely to appraisals. Arriving at the guild, Noel asks Alma what her plans are. She's already qualified for a rank up, as evidenced by the mark on her chest, which appears automatically once requirements are met. Noel wants to know if she still plans to become an assassin. Alma is undecided and asks Noel's opinion. He isn't certain either. An assassin build would be advantageous in combat, but he's hesitant to make a commitment and risk skill overlap with future team recruits. Surprised, Alma hadn't realized Noel intended to recruit more members, and she's a little jealous. Noel explains it would be reckless to enter an abyss with only 2 members, so he wants to evaluate Alma's options first. Once they complete the appraisal, Noel and Alma head to a blacksmith shop operated by a dwarf. Proper equipment enhances a seeker's potential, so maintaining their gear is essential. The blacksmith greets Noel warmly, evidently on good terms with him, and then shifts attention to Alma, assuming she's a new party member. He starts assessing her equipment needs, but gets slightly distracted by Alma's attributes. Next, Noel takes Alma to a skill book shop for her to pick up some skill guides. He speaks to the shop owner, instructing her to help Alma select suitable skills while he heads out. Alma asks where he's going, so Noel explains that this store only stocks scout skill books, and he needs to visit another shop for his talker books. Before he leaves, he reminds Alma she has a strict budget of 1 million for skill books, and not to waste a cent. Alma promises to stick to the budget, but as soon as he's gone, she splurges on a giant teddy bear. When Noel returns, he's annoyed with her for the expenditure, but also frustrated with himself for trusting her. Alma defends her purchase, saying she didn't blow the entire budget. She managed to get a powerful skill book called Armor Piercing, which halves an enemy's defense. It cost 800,000, and she used the leftover funds on the bears since Noel won't let her hug him anymore. Alma considers the trip a success, though she notices Noel didn't buy anything for himself. He explains that the skill book he wanted, one for exorcism, was far too expensive at 30 million, though it would allow him to instantly take down undead monsters. Just then, Noel spots someone passing by, excuses himself, and follows the figure into a secluded alley. The man reveals himself to be Loki, the shapeshifter who had infiltrated the prison earlier. Noel had hired him to investigate the puppeteer, and Loki delivers the information gathered. Although he's curious about Noel's plans, he questions the wisdom of recruiting the puppeteer, considering the man once terrorized the capital with his abilities. But that's precisely why Noel wants him. He believes the puppeteer was framed, and Loki's investigation is part of proving his innocence. Loki acknowledges Noel's strategy, but finds it strange, given Noel's past actions, like selling former teammates as slaves. Hearing Noel talk about rescuing a death row inmate is unexpected, yet Noel takes pride in this turnaround, showing a clear conviction in his plan. After reviewing Loki's report, Noel praises him for the thorough work, though Loki shrugs it off as routine. His imitator class, after all, allows him to take on anyone's form, making infiltration a natural talent. Noel pays Loki for his work and requests that he continue investigating. Before leaving, Loki mentions some additional intel. A dangerous new drug has appeared on the market, supposedly stronger than anything else, but it causes uncontrollable fits of rage, leading to a spike in violent crime. Noel wonders who would dare sell such a substance, assuming the Luciano family would put a quick stop to it once they found out. However, Loki reveals that the group distributing the drug is actually a subdivision of the Luciano family, making it unlikely that anything will be done about it. The territory's current overseers are the Gambinos, and their leader, Albert Gambino, is known for his erratic behavior. Meanwhile, Alma is annoyed that Noel has left her alone for so long, so she tries to lift her spirits with some food. Just then, an old friend of hers happens to pass by. On Noel's end, he's walking through Gambino territory, disappointed by the area's decline. The previous head of the Gambino family was a respectable man, someone even Pinocchio admired, but when he passed, his son Albert took over, and the place fell into chaos. While walking, Noel spots a man sitting by the roadside who looks distinctly different from the local populace, leading Noel to assume he's an immigrant. However, judging by his current condition, Noel thinks the man may end up dying as a beggar. Feeling a bit sorry, Noel drops a coin beside him. To Noel's surprise, the man stands up and returns the coin, assuming Noel dropped it by accident. He even warns Noel that this place isn't safe for a cute girl like him. Offended, Noel clarifies that he's a guy and insists he won't take back the coin after a filthy beggar has touched it. As he begins to walk away, the man, feeling slighted, tries to grab Noel's shoulder. Noel retaliates by delivering a sharp kick to the man's stomach, sending him flying. He warns the man never to lay a hand on him. This condescending attitude reminds the man of someone he used to know, and he refuses to let it go. Although he typically avoids fights, he's not so weak as to ignore this slight. He takes a fighting stance, revealing himself to be skilled with a sword, and charges at Noel with a strike that forces Noel to dodge for his life. The man keeps up his relentless assault until Noel finally grabs his arm and flings him into a nearby building. Impressed, the man acknowledges Noel's fighting abilities and asks if he's from the ninja class. Since the ninja class is exclusive to an island in the Far East, Noel deduces it must be this man's homeland. Noel replies that he's just a talker, and the man is astonished a talker could fight so well. But before they can engage seriously, a small figure, a munchkin, interrupts, chastising Koga for fighting without his permission. As this unfolds, Alma and her friend sit down to chat. Her friend is surprised Alma hasn't ranked up yet. Alma explains she has two main options, assassin or chaser, but Noel advised her to hold off on making a decision. Her friend sees Noel's logic, as chasers and assassins serve entirely different roles, and Alma's choice would hinge on the needs of other team members. She guesses Noel is likely out recruiting someone new as they speak. Back on Noel's side, the little man continues scolding Koga, complaining he had told him to stay put and doesn't want any excuses. He even activates his ring, shocking Koga into unconsciousness. Noel recognizes it as an oath of subordination ring, a device that forces compliance in a master-slave relationship. Though it's typically restricted by law, after Koga is subdued, the little turns to Noel, questioning why they were fighting, but also mistaking Noel for a girl. When the man's behavior turns strange, Noel kicks him across the street. Offended, The little man demands an explanation, but Noel draws a gun on him, declaring that he'll be the one asking questions. Noel's first question is where the munchkin comes from since he doesn't seem local. The man reveals he's from Soldoland, a distant southern region, and Noel then asks his reason for coming to the capital. The munchkin hesitates, but under the gun's persuasion, admits he's on the run. He used to work for the Bullied family, managing their underground fighting ring until he was caught embezzling funds and had to flee. He came to Eltria, Luciano territory, hoping the Bullieds wouldn't follow him. Koga, one of his enslaved fighters, was brought along in his escape. Noel suspects the man intends to use Koga to re-enter Altria's underground fighting scene, which the munchkin confirms. He even asks if Noel might be involved in the underground ring and could vouch for him. Noel, unimpressed, clarifies that he's a seeker and, for the record, a man. Shocked, the man is baffled that someone with Noel's looks could be male. Noel, angered by the reaction, considers his options. The munchkin is fleeing the Bullieds, so Noel wouldn't face repercussions for killing him. Besides, with the little man gone, Noel could take Koga for his team. Given the clear benefits, Noel makes his decision and executes the man. Noel may be heartless, but he's no killer. He fires a warning shot and spares the man's life, but he warns that if he doesn't leave within the next 10 seconds, Noel won't miss the second time. The terrified man scrambles to his feet and kicks Koga, signaling it's time to run. Noel, while wishing Koga had the strength he needed, recognizes that Koga's unwillingness to kill his master to gain freedom makes him weak-willed, exactly the kind of person Noel doesn't want on his team. Later, Noel makes his way back to the cafe, where Lisha greets him. However, he doesn't recall inviting her, so he dryly remarks he won't be paying for her meal. Alma angrily chimes in, defending Lisha, who's only here to keep her company since Noel abandoned her for so long. With a sigh, Noel relents and agrees to cover their meals just this once. He takes a seat, and Lisha asks if he found any promising recruits. She assumes his long absence meant he'd been busy assembling a team, but Noel admits he didn't meet anyone who fit his standards. Instead, he has something else on his mind and asks if she knows anything about a dangerous drug currently in circulation. Lisha has heard rumors but isn't well informed, so Noel explains that it's known to induce powerful rage as a side effect and is being left unchecked. He advises her to be cautious, which surprises Lisha since Noel isn't the type to show concern. Noel clarifies that he's only sharing information because he's on good terms with her party. She thanks him and gets ready to leave, inviting Alma to join her at a sweet shop she's found not just as fellow seekers, but as friends. Alma likes the sound of that, but Noel has no intention of forging deep friendships with Lisha, so he urges her to get going. Once Lisha leaves, Noel reflects on the drug situation. If even Lisha has caught wind of it, then it must have spread beyond the capital, and Noel hopes it won't become an even greater threat. Meanwhile, Miguel finds himself captured by Albert Gambino. Normally, Albert wouldn't be involved, but the Bullieds family has asked the Gambino family to exact revenge on Miguel for his betrayal. Miguel panics, knowing Albert's reputation as a genuine psychopath who keeps the skulls of people he dislikes in a display case. Albert has no intention of simply handing Miguel over, and Miguel, desperate, starts flattering Albert. He suggests that someone as formidable as Albert shouldn't bother with mundane tasks like collecting a bounty for the Bullieds. Unfortunately for Miguel, his flattery backfires, as Albert decides to have some fun instead. His idea of fun, skinning Miguel alive and turning him into a doll. Miguel, horrified, asks if Albert is joking, but Albert is entirely serious. He even plans to skin Koga too. Koga overhears this, but remains indifferent, having given up on life long ago. Dying in this brutal way doesn't faze him, but before Albert can start, a debt collector arrives to report someone who failed to pay on time. It's the chief of Mint's village, who nervously explains that he had gathered the money, but was robbed by an evil seeker named Noel, who even called Albert Gambino a bitch. Outraged, Albert vows to make Noel pay for this insult. As a reward for the chief's honesty, Albert grants him more time to pay, but there will still be penalties for being late. Albert quickly decides that taking the chief's right arm will be suitable compensation. The chief, frozen in fear, watches as Albert orders Koga to carry out the punishment. Koga, A skilled swordsman should be able to manage it even with a stick. At first, Koga hesitates, but Miguel screams at him to follow orders. Just as Koga prepares to strike, Albert tells him to hold on. Albert then bites down on a purple drug crystal, getting high, since he believes violence is more enjoyable that way. Now, in a twisted, altered state, Albert gives Koga the go-ahead. The chief, in denial, protests that Koga can't cut off his hand with a mere stick. Yet, in an instant, Koga makes his move, and the chief's hand falls to the ground. The chief screams in agony, and Albert is thrilled by the spectacle. Seizing the moment, Miguel offers Koga's ownership to Albert as a desperate attempt to win favor. It works. Albert accepts, making Koga officially his. Koga is then led to another room to change out of his rags, revealing his tragic past. His father, a wealthy businessman, and his mother, one of the most beautiful women of the Lambs, seemed to have a blessed life. But one day, everything shattered when Koga's father was attacked and knocked unconscious, while his mother was dragged away and assaulted. By the time his father came to, the damage had been done. 9 months later, Koga was born. His mother did her best to care for him, but Koga's father had grown bitter and resentful toward the child. One night, when she saw the disdain in her husband's eyes, she couldn't take it any longer and drove a sword through her neck. Years passed, and Koga's father descended into alcoholism. Mourning his lost wife, Koga, still longing for fatherly love, tried his best to be useful to him. Yet, the sight of Koga often sent his father into fits of rage, and the rest of the people in the estate wished Koga had died alongside his mother so they wouldn't have to see his face. Growing up in a household filled with ridicule and rejection took a severe toll on Koga's self-worth. One morning, Koga woke up to find himself on a boat with no explanation. It didn't take long for him to realize he had likely been sold off as a slave by his family, who no longer wanted him around. That was when Koga first met Miguel, who wasted no time dragging him to an illegal fighting ring. Koga began dominating the fights, and Miguel seemed thrilled, showering him with praise for the first time in Koga's life. The unexpected compliments brought Koga to tears, but he quickly learned that Miguel didn't care about him at all, only about the money he made from Koga's victories. In the present, Koga finishes suiting up and is officially sent out on his first mission under Albert's command. Meanwhile, that same night, Noel makes his way to an abandoned church to meet Loki, who claims to have important information. Because Noel has always treated him well, Loki warns him that the Gambino family is out for his head. He explains how the chief of Mint's village lied to Albert Gambino, saying Noel had insulted him, and Albert bought the story. Now, an assassin has been dispatched to take Noel out. Noel finds it ridiculous that Albert would order a hit over such flimsy evidence. But Albert is a madman, and rational minds can't comprehend his thinking. Noel wonders how someone like Albert even managed to become the head of the Gambino family, and the answer is simple: nepotism. Despite being unfit, Albert inherited the position because he was the former leader's only son. Suddenly, Noel hears the clanking of armor approaching and realizes someone is coming. It dawns on him that Loki must have sold him out. Loki apologizes, explaining that he had no choice. If he hadn't agreed, the Gambino family would have killed him. He figures he'll flee to another country afterward to escape their reach, but Noel points out the flaw in that plan. Nothing is stopping him from shooting Loki right now. Noel is disappointed he has to kill Loki, especially since he enjoyed having him around. Yet, to Noel's surprise, Loki doesn't run and seems prepared to die. Curious, Noel asks why Loki is so ready to give up his life. And Loki admits he has realized that, in betraying Noel, he also betrayed his pride as an informant. He needs to atone. Seeing Loki's sincerity, Noel decides to spare him, and even assures him he won't need to leave the country because Noel plans to destroy the Gambino family himself. Loki is taken aback, then starts laughing hysterically, as Noel's act of forgiveness is completely uncharacteristic. Nevertheless, he is grateful for the second chance and vows to make it up to Noel, although he knows he's useless in a fight, so he leaves. Once Loki is gone, Noel prepares to face his attacker. He drinks a battle potion, which enhances his physical abilities for 10 minutes, but leaves his body drained afterward. When the attacker steps into view, Noel is shocked to see that it's Koga, and Koga is equally surprised to find Noel as his target. Noel sarcastically congratulates Koga on becoming an assassin for the Gambino family, noting it's quite the upgrade from being a street fighter. With no interruptions this time, Noel suggests they continue where they left off, aiming his gun at Koga. However, Koga hesitates to draw his swords. He doesn't really want to fight Noel, still feeling indebted for the silver coin, but he cannot disobey his master's orders. Reluctantly, he accepts the duel, introducing himself as Koga, the slicing longswordsman. Noel thinks it's foolish for Koga to reveal his identity, but respects the warrior's pride and introduces himself in return. The battle begins with Noel firing his gun, but Koga dodges and closes in on him just before Koga can slash him. Noel uses a wire to escape to safety. Now that Koga is well fed and stronger, his speed and precision have significantly improved since their last encounter. Still, Noel has a plan. He fires a flame bullet, which Koga narrowly avoids, but flames engulf him. Noel assumes Koga has taken serious damage, but Koga emerges unscathed. Having cut the air to create a protective barrier, Koga leaps forward, forcing Noel into close combat. Desperate, Noel tries aiming for Koga's groin, but Koga dodges and angrily calls out the cheap move. Noel doesn't care. In a life or death struggle, dirty tricks are fair game. Pulling out a flashbang, Noel blinds Koga and moves in for the kill. Yet, before Noel can strike, Koga unleashes a special technique, sending a flurry of slashes his way. Koga corners Noel on a ledge. Though Noel tries to stop him with a stun howl, Koga slices through the sound attack, sending Noel plummeting down into the abyss. After hitting the ground, Noel loses consciousness, and when he finally comes to, he finds Koga looming over him, sword aimed directly at Noel's head. Koga remarks on how impressed he was by Noel's skills and commends him for being such a formidable adversary. But Noel has no interest in receiving half-hearted compliments. He demands to know why Koga hasn't finished him off yet. Koga stammers, unsure of what to say, as although his mission was to eliminate Noel, he finds himself unable to follow through after such an intense battle. Noel, seeing Koga hesitate, becomes furious and begins shouting at him, gripping the sword and declaring that Koga cannot afford to show mercy to an enemy. If Koga won't kill him, Noel warns, then Albert certainly won't allow him to live. While that may be true, Koga is still hesitant, and he doesn't understand why Noel is trying so hard to get him to finish the job when it would mean his death. So, he assumes Noel is truly concerned for the lives of others. But a moment later, Noel says Koga has officially missed his chance to kill him because Alma has just arrived, and she's not letting anyone besides her touch Noel's beautiful body. Before the fight started, Noel used his link skill to send a message to Alma about his situation, and he's really glad she's here since the battle potion he drank has just worn off, and the side effects have left him immobilized. Alma doesn't grasp all the specifics, but she knows one thing: Koga attacked Noel. She asks Noel if it's okay for her to kill him, and Noel gives her the go-ahead. Without hesitation, Alma launches an attack on Koga, who raises his swords to block her strike, though he begs her not to go through with this since he doesn't want to be forced to kill a woman. Alma bursts into laughter, amused by his words, considering she holds the advantage. But Koga points out that she only caught him off guard with a sneak attack and still failed to land a fatal blow. Alma takes this as a challenge and activates her acceleration skill to speed blitz Koga and prove that she is superior. But Koga counters by activating his sense enhancement skill, which allows him to react much faster and with greater precision when his eyes are closed. As the two continue to battle, Noel is once again reminded of the fact that as a talker, he will never be able to do things like Alma and Koga can. But it just reignites his motivation to overcome the strong and become the strongest. Up until now, Alma and Koga have fought each other to a draw, and Alma admits that Koga is stronger than she initially thought. Still, she's determined to finish him with her next poisonous attack. As she gets serious, Koga decides it's time to embrace gender equality and readies his insta-kill slash to take Alma down in one hit. But before either can make their next move, Noel fires a flare into the sky and orders Alma to retreat. Though reluctant, Alma understands this isn't a request but an order. so she reluctantly agrees to fall back. Noel tells Koga he has to leave as well since the flare he fired will draw the attention of the military police, and Albert will be really angry if the imperial government finds out what he's trying to do here. As much as Koga doesn't want to walk away empty-handed, he has no choice but to listen to what Noel says. But before he leaves, Noel calls him back and says he has a message he wants Koga to pass on to Albert. The following day, Koga reports back to Albert about his unsuccessful attempt to kill Noel. But surprisingly, Albert seems unusually calm about the whole thing. He even hands Koga a box containing Miguel's head, but otherwise maintains his laid-back demeanor. Albert tells Koga he'll let this failure slide since he's in a good mood today, but he warns him not to fail a second time. Koga vows to complete the mission no matter the cost, which pleases Albert, and he dismisses Koga. But before Koga leaves, he remembers that Noel gave him a message for Albert. Albert Gambino, I'm going to take down your entire organization and send your ass to the gulag. Albert calmly asks if Koga is telling the truth or if he's lying like the chief of Mints did, but there isn't a hint of deceit in Koga's face. So Albert starts tweaking out, and now he wants Noel to die even more. Koga and Albert's bodyguard, Leos, exit Albert's office to give him some time to cool off. As they walk away, Leos mentions that Koga may have pushed things a bit too far with his words, prompting Koga to apologize. Leos asks if Koga's reaction was because Miguel was killed, but Koga, who pretty much despised Miguel, has no reason to care about his death. The real reason Koga felt compelled to deliver Noel's message is because he genuinely admires Noel and considers him an incredible person. Even though he's only a talker, Noel trained himself to the point where he could go toe-to-toe against someone like Koga. Koga knows the training must have been excruciating for Noel, but even then, no amount of training will ever make him strong enough to defeat a combat class as a talker. Yet despite this fact, Noel has never once lost the look in his eyes that says he will become the strongest in the world, no matter what. After listening to Koga, Leos remarks that he seems infatuated with Noel. He clarifies that he means Koga admires Noel as a rival and is eager to grow stronger alongside him. Now that Koga thinks about it, Leos is absolutely right, but he's curious about how Leos has so much insight on the matter. Leos explains that he once went through something similar himself, though it was a long time ago. The next day, Albert pulls up on Noel while he's at the secret tavern, and he's looking to make Noel pay for what he said. He's got a rank Leos and a couple of B-rank seekers outside, so he's really confident that he can take Noel out today and plops down at Noel's table to confront him. He then grabs Noel's bottle of wine and starts chugging it as a display of superiority, but he absolutely hates how the wine tastes. Even though he's outnumbered, Noel calmly mocks Albert, remarking that it's rude to drink someone else's wine uninvited, though perhaps manners are too complex for Albert to grasp. Enraged, Albert gets right in Noel's face, only for Noel to tell him to back off, saying his bad breath is spoiling his appetite. Insulted, Albert threatens to cut out Noel's tongue. Just before he can actually do anything, one of the seekers in the tavern walks up behind him and tells him to stop. He has no idea what kind of beef Albert has against Noel, but he wants to make it clear that no matter the reason, he is not allowed to attack any seekers in this tavern. Albert is offended and asks the man if he knows who he is, and the seeker is well aware of Albert's reputation. But as a seeker, he and the other patrons of this bar refuse to let an outsider like Albert do what he wants. Albert doesn't like being told no, so he orders Leos and the rest of the bodyguards to kill Noel and all the seekers in the tavern. But the bodyguards are hesitant to comply with the order. Leos points out that it would be easy for them to kill all the seekers since everyone in here is only C rank. But if they go through with it, they are going to have to explain themselves to Don Luciano, and it would be really difficult to justify it. They're already on thin ice since he says it is because of that drug problem. So another slip-up will pretty much spell doom for the Gambino family. However, if he still insists on going through with it, Leos will make sure the job gets done. Now uncertain of his next move, Albert hesitates, prompting Noel to roast him even further, calling him a cowardly fool with zero intelligence. Albert grows even angrier, but Noel warns him that his rage might work against him since it'll only pump his blood faster, spreading the poison he drank from the wine even quicker. The mention of poison sends Albert into a panic, and No calmly explains that he poisoned the wine the moment he saw Albert walk through the door. Albert is stunned, questioning how Noel could take such a risk without knowing for sure Albert would drink it. But Noel shrugs, pointing out that it was a simple choice. If Albert didn't drink, no harm done. But since he did, Noel's victory is practically guaranteed. Albert begins violently trying to throw up the poison, but Noel tells him it's too late for that since the poison has already made its way into Albert's bloodstream by now. Albert is now in full-on panic mode and rushes out of the bar to go to a doctor. But once Albert is gone, Leos compliments Noel for being so clever. He takes the wine and drinks from it. He knows the wine wasn't actually poisoned, and that Noel was just saying that to convince Albert to get out of here. Leos takes one look at Noel and can immediately tell that Koga was right about the determination in his eyes. So as a favor, he offers Noel two choices. He can take this money and leave the capital so he doesn't get attacked by Albert again. But if he chooses to stay, then Leos will have no choice but to kill him right now. Noel opts for the first choice and gets up to leave with Alma. As they pass through the city gates, Alma is thoroughly impressed with Noel, noting how everything played out exactly as he planned. Noel shares in her relief that things have gone well so far, though he knows the real challenges are just beginning. For now, they're parting ways for a week. Noel has something he needs to investigate, while Alma intends to train in the woods so she'll be stronger the next time she faces Koga. They share a fist bump, and Noel vows that when he returns, he will bring down Albert Gambino once and for all. A week later, Noel is back from his little expedition, and the second he sets foot in town, Albert pulls up on him with his entire army of bodyguards. He believes he has Noel cornered, so he orders them to start off by breaking all of Noel's arms and legs to make sure he suffers for as much time as possible. But surprisingly, Leos, Koga, and the others completely ignore his order, and Albert doesn't understand what's going on. Noel breaks out laughing, but since an idiot like Albert will never figure things out on his own, Noel explains to him that he has lost all right to order Leos and the others around. Earlier that day, Leos and the others were gathered at a bar, all feeling crushed after Albert had ordered them to kill a young girl. She had clutched a toy as if it were her most cherished possession, and the guilt weighed heavily on them. They turned to Leos, questioning why they continued to follow Albert's twisted orders. They had entered this line of work out of respect for the former boss, but respect is a foreign concept to Albert, and they're finding it harder to obey him. During their conversation, Noel arrives and notices they're holding the gift he had given to the daughter of the mince chief. Though he thought her father was a rat, Noel had a soft spot for the girl, and learning of her death at Albert's orders stings. Anyway, he came here to have a chat with Leos, and Leos asks if Noel knows what's going to happen now that he's back in town. Noel is aware, but he tells them he didn't come to fight, he just wanted to drop off a document that they might find interesting. The piece of paper is Albert's birth certificate, and Noel got it because he had Loki look into Albert's origins while he was gone for a week. From what Loki found, Albert is really the son of a different man, but the former leader of the Gambinos had an affair with Albert's mother before Albert was born. So, as a favor to her, he accepted Albert as his heir, even though Albert is not related to the Gambino family at all. There was also something else Noel wanted to investigate, so he asked Loki to dig into the former Gambino boss's cause of death. The investigation revealed not only that Albert isn't actually the former boss's son, but also that he poisoned the boss and disguised it as an illness. Albert is stunned, wondering how Noel managed to uncover this, but he insists they have no way to prove he did anything. However, Noel smirks, explaining that he has all the proof he could need, thanks to a skill called Confess that compels people to admit to their crimes. A confession from Albert will be more than enough evidence. Once Albert has been forced to admit to his crimes, Leos goes up to him and tells him that he is no longer their boss. He is immoral, stupid, and heartless, so they can't justify serving a man like him. At the same time, regardless of his actions, the former boss did name Albert as his successor, so Leos is going to give him one last chance to redeem himself. If he fights Noel and Noel wins, he can continue being the leader of the Gambino family. But Leos knows Albert would get folded immediately if he fought Noel himself, so he allows him to pick someone to represent him in battle. Albert refuses to be put on trial like this, But suddenly, Pinocchio arrives on the scene. Noel had specifically invited him to serve as a witness to the duel, leaving Albert with no choice in the matter anymore. Pinocchio had been searching for an opportunity to deal with Albert for quite some time. So when Noel approached him with this plan, he eagerly agreed to take part. Besides, if Noel comes out on top, Pinocchio has promised to pay him 50 million. Albert, however, accuses Pinocchio of masterminding the entire scheme, but Pinocchio denies it. Clearly fed up with Albert's constant whining, losing his patience, he shouts at Albert to stop wasting time and choose someone to fight on his behalf otherwise. He warns Albert will face far worse consequences at his hands. Albert agrees to pick a proxy, and Pinocchio tells him that if he wins, then he will be acknowledged as the boss of the Gambino family once more. Furthermore, Pinocchio will even let the whole scene Albert caused at the secret tavern go, so he better make his choice quickly. Albert looks around for a second and ends up telling Koga to fight for him. Noel had predicted this would happen since, even though Koga isn't the strongest person here, he's bound by an oath of subordination, so he wouldn't be able to betray Albert even if he wanted to. Alma insists on having a rematch to prove she's superior to Koga, but Noel steps forward, pushing her aside, and declares that he will handle it himself. Alma tries to dissuade him, reminding him that he stands no chance against Koga, but Noel remains confident, assuring her that he has a solid plan. He tells her to sit back and watch as he takes care of things. When Noel finally stands face to face with Koga, he observes how eager Koga looks to fight, despite having nothing to gain from winning. However, Koga is simply thrilled at the opportunity to face Noel again. If Noel is this eager to fight personally, Koga assumes he must have some kind of trick up his sleeve, and he can't wait to find out what it is. The two ready themselves and charge at each other, but Noel jumps into the air and fires an ice bullet. Even though Koga manages to counter it, the bullet still creates a massive ice wall around them. So now no one can see what's going on inside. As the fight goes on, Noel is running around to avoid getting slashed by Koga. When he finally creates some distance, Koga takes a stance that means he's about to use his flash ability. That skill basically increases Koga's attack power 7-fold once he draws his sword, so if Noel gets too close, he might end up getting cut in half by it. Noel remains unfazed, confident that he's already set the stage for his victory. To Koga's surprise, Noel tosses his gun aside, claiming it's out of ammo, and announces that he'll be finishing the fight with a dagger instead. But before engaging, Noel has one thing to ask. Can you do the thug shaker? Caught completely off guard, Koga demands to know what Noel is talking about. However, the question was just a distraction, allowing Noel to spot an opening in Koga's defenses. Now, with Koga hesitating, unsure if Noel has a hidden trump card, that brief moment of hesitation is all Noel needs to make his move. Koga eventually decides to fight back and slashes at Noel's arm. But this is all going according to plan, which is why Noel let him slash his arm. While Koga's sword is stuck, Noel pulls it away from him. Koga can't believe Noel would go that far for victory, but simply getting his sword away from him is nowhere near enough to stop Koga. He pushes Noel away and runs to catch his sword before it even hits the ground. Koga then unleashes a slash that destroys the ice dome and sends Noel flying, but Noel isn't down yet. As Koga leaps in to deliver a killing blow, he believes he struck Noel, but instead, his blade cuts into an ice bullet Noel had hidden in his pocket. The bullet's effects immediately take hold, causing Koga's body to freeze solid. Every move Noel had made up until this moment was carefully orchestrated to lure Koga into dropping his guard and falling for this trap. With Koga immobilized, Noel seizes the opportunity, jumping up and delivering a powerful kick that knocks him out. From the time Koga was a child, he was unable to fight back for himself because no one ever cared about him. But when he became a gladiator, survival forced him to fight every day just to stay alive. While he hated every minute of it, all those death battles made him stronger. However, no matter how strong he got, he was always still that weak-minded little kid who couldn't fight back for himself, so he's only ever been able to do what he is told. Noel is declared the victor of the match, and as Koga lies on the ground, He wishes he could be more strong-willed like No. Despite being a talker, No has never once let others trample on his freedoms or ideals. Koga is not going to be getting up for a while, but since the winner of the match has been decided, it looks like Albert has just lost all rights to call himself the leader of the Gambino family. With his task complete, No announces to Finocchio that he's leaving, and tells them they can do whatever they want with Albert. Before he departs, Leos praises No for his remarkable fighting skills and expresses gratitude for finally dealing with Albert. Leos even offers his support, promising to help No whenever he might need it. However, No declines the offer, making it clear that he has no interest in maintaining any connection with the Gambino family. No and Alma head to a nearby building, where Alma starts patching up his wounds. She tells No he was being far too reckless in his fight. That final kick he delivered to Koga's chest was way too risky because Koga could have easily countered it if he had been expecting it. No says everything worked out in the end, so she shouldn't be worrying about it. But Alma reminds him that fighting is her job, and No's job is to be the commander. She doesn't want him to keep getting into reckless fights personally. Noel apologizes and promises that he won't do it again. Alma tells him he can always rely on her when it comes to fighting. At that moment, Finocchio enters the room, congratulating Noel on a job well done. But he mentions there's something he wants to discuss with him. Noel immediately asks if it's related to the payment he's owed for defeating Albert. Making it clear that he won't accept any discounts, Finocchio chuckles and assures him that he wouldn't dare negotiate over something like this. After all, the deal worked out perfectly for him. He got rid of an incompetent rival without taking on any personal risk. Noel fully earned every bit of that 50 million. However, Finocchio has another matter to discuss, something private. So he asks Alma to step out of the room for a moment. Noel reassures Alma that it's fine, and with that, she leaves the room. As soon as she is gone, Finocchio gets straight to the point and asks Noel to join his Luciano family. He promises to treat Noel well, and if he wants, Finocchio is even willing to make Noel the leader of the Gambino family. Noel finds the idea amusing, but he reminds Finocchio that he is only 16. So how could he possibly lead an entire family by himself? Finocchio tells him age is irrelevant. The only thing that's important is the fact that Noel has the guts to do it. Noel admits that Finocchio is right about that, but he has already turned down this invitation once before. So Finocchio should know by now that there's no way Noel would ever serve under anyone. That Finocchio questions Noel, asking if he's absolutely sure about his answer. Noel confidently replies that he is. Finocchio then calmly informs him that his class is in a rank punisher, which grants him access to a rather unique skill. Suddenly, Noel senses something is terribly wrong. When he looks up, he's horrified to see Finocchio literally holding his heart in his hand. Alarmed, Noel checks himself and, as expected, there's no heartbeat in his chest. Finocchio begins to explain the mechanics of his skill. The judgment ability allows him to forcibly extract the heart of his target against their will after they've refused one of his requests twice. Even though Noel has no heart right now, he is still alive because the heart is still spatially linked to his body. However, if Finocchio steps more than 5 meters away from Noel or crushes his heart, Noel will die. Finocchio thinks Noel is a little too talented to be left on his own, because he will eventually become a problem for the Finocchio family. Noel asks if Finocchio intends to kill him before he becomes a possible threat. And that's exactly what Finocchio intends to do. But he's willing to give Noel one last chance. So he asks him again to join the Luciano family. Noel responds with a laugh, firmly stating that he will never agree to Finocchio's demands. Rising to his feet, he begins walking toward Finocchio. The latter warns him that fighting is pointless since his heart won't return to his chest unless Finocchio chooses to dispel the skill. Undeterred, Noel keeps advancing and boldly declares that he will become the greatest seeker to ever live, so powerful that even the Luciano family wouldn't dare lay a finger on him. Acknowledging Noel's determination, Finocchio admits that perhaps the best course of action is to kill him now. Noel, however, encourages Finocchio to go through with it, but reminds him of one thing. The moment Finocchio kills him, he will be proving to everyone, including himself, that he's a coward so terrified of Noel's potential that he chose to eliminate him while he was still weak, instead of facing him when he grows strong. whether Finocchio chooses to kill him now or not. No makes it clear that he will bow down to no one, even though Finocchio is the one holding No's heart in his hand. No has managed to grip Finocchio's heart with fear. Finocchio backtracks and says he was only kidding about killing him. He returns No's heart to his chest, then apologizes for the misunderstanding and turns to leave. But before he exits, he reminds No that he can't take back what he has said, so he better make it to the top of the world of Seekers for real. As Finocchio exits the room, he locks eyes with Alma, whose expression radiates murderous intent after witnessing his latest stunt. Despite her seething anger, she doesn't make a move, so Finocchio continues on his way, heading back to his carriage where Albert is being held. The moment Albert sees Finocchio, he begins pleading desperately for his life, terrified of what might happen next. Finocchio, irritated by Albert's pathetic display, pauses to think before a sinister idea crosses his mind. He assures Albert that he won't kill him, but then asks if he's ever seen the Human Centipede movie, leaving no doubt that Albert is about to endure something unimaginably horrific under Finocchio's control. The next day, No meets with Koga and shows him that he is now in possession of the contract of subordination that binds Koga as a slave. Koga thinks this means No wants to become his master, but No says he has no use for a slave like him. It's true that Koga is decently powerful, but compared to the rest of the Seekers in this world, he is still pretty much a weakling. More importantly, No wishes to stand at the top of the world of Seekers, so he doesn't have time to take care of a weak little puppy. What he needs is a fierce wolf. No hands Koga the contract, declaring that he's now a free man and can do whatever he desires. With his newfound freedom, No asks Koga what he wants to do. Having spent his entire life being manipulated and used by others, Koga finds himself at a loss, uncertain about how to move forward. However, there's one thing he's sure of. He wants to stay by Noel's side and witness him achieve his dream. If Noel needs a fierce wolf to help him, then that's exactly what Koga will become. He asks Noel for permission to join Blue Beyond, and Noel gladly welcomes him to the team, thrilled to have him aboard. A little while later, the party heads out on their first mission, and their overall teamwork is nearly flawless. Noel gives the commands and provides support. Koga cuts through the enemy forces, and Alma clears a path for him to do so. They are a well-oiled machine, but as Koga tries to chop off the head of the monster general, Alma comes in and steals his kill. The two start arguing over it, so Noel steps in and tells them both to knock it off since they are all on the same team. He tells Alma to stop acting out on the battlefield since it messes up their teamwork, but he also reminds Koga that there are no kill counts here, so he shouldn't be getting so upset over Alma stealing his kill. All things considered, this was an excellent outcome for their first quest as a team of 3. Noel mentions that as soon as they return to the capital, he plans to apply for them to become an official clan. By forming a clan, they will gain state recognition, allowing them to accept quests directly without needing intermediaries or paying commissions. As Noel explains this, Koga notices something on Noel's arm and points it out. Noel realizes it's the mark signifying that he's eligible to rank up to B rank. This is fantastic news, as it brings him another step closer to achieving his ultimate goal of becoming the strongest 7-star Regalia Seeker. Guys, that's the end of the video. If you liked this video, please leave a comment in the comment section. Also subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon. Like the video and share it too. Thank you for watching and see you next time again.